really would like to thank the Georgian Society for inviting me here to speak today on behalf of the Minister. Minister Deenahan would really have liked to have attended today. He sends his regrets, but he has had to travel to New York. Unfortunately, this was something that has happened in the last couple of weeks. Many people know that Minister Jimmy Deenahan was a very good friend of the Knight of Glyn and an admirer of the work of the Georgian Society. And I think on behalf of the department, maybe this is the first public occasion just to note the passing of the Knight of Glyn. And as I said, the Minister was a good friend and certainly appreciated everything that he was striving to achieve. In relation to the conference today, I would just like to thank the Society for, I think it's a very forward-looking agenda. The title, Picking Up the Pieces, might bring us into a negative space, but when you actually look at what the conference is about, I think it's much more positive. It's, as it says in the introduction, to pinpoint not just the problems but possibilities. And we know the many problems. The financial supports available, for example, from our department, the Department responsible for heritage, have dropped dramatically since 2008. The economic activities in our towns and cities, in the urban cores, has fallen off, and this has created particular pressures, particularly in the commercial sector. And we all know the results of leaving buildings unoccupied and unused for any period of time. So that's a particular problem. Even technological change is something we need to be mindful of. People buying more and more online record shops, bookshops, closing down, often in some of the finest buildings. Local authorities who are charged with on the ground with looking after the built heritage in that public realm are struggling with human resources, financial resources. Managing the built-in heritage is one challenge which they face. On the other hand, the bursting of the bubble gives us now an opportunity to pause and reflect and see how we can go forward in a more sustainable way in the future. And I think this is what the conference is about. In the department, we're here to listen as well. We know we certainly don't have all the answers. Sometimes we have the answers, but we don't have any way to deliver those answers just right now. But I think we need to discuss, plan, and see are there things that we can think about, propose, begin to plan for, so that we can prepare for times to get better. My colleague Martin Coigligh will be speaking after me, and he will outline some of the work which the department is doing at the moment. Because even in bad times, there are things that we can do. There are ways we can change our methodologies, our ways of working, that don't necessarily cost money, but can assist. As Patrick said, the last decade hasn't been all bad news, and I think we need to reflect on some of the gains which the built heritage has made during the good economic times. Patrick mentioned there were specific projects, but overall, there's no doubt that our town and city centres are in a much better place today than they were a decade ago or 20 years ago, when there were so many derelict sites in our main streets. And I suppose the danger is, as we see stores begin to close down, that we would reverse back into that situation. But I don't think so. I don't think we will go back that way, because the world has changed. There's a new awareness. We've better legislation. We had reasonably good financial supports for a period. They have gone for the moment. The work of bodies like yourselves in the voluntary sector, or by the department, the Heritage Council, and local authorities in raising awareness and in carrying out actions on the ground, all contributed to having us in a better place. Maybe a point for the debate is the issue of the area-based tax incentives. Obviously not universally successful, but they brought a huge amount of life into our towns and cities. Maybe they were too good, a bit like a drug We got addicted to them, and we're now suffering some of the negative consequences of that. The resulting is that they as an instrument, are very much in bad odour at the moment, and especially at a time when the government is struggling to recover and build a tax base. So, where do we go in that regard from here on in? Patrick mentioned the greater appreciation of the built heritage as part of the economic story. We, in a forum like this, we understand the social and cultural importance of the asset. We need to tell a story not only of that, but of the economic importance of our built heritage. As Patrick again said, people don't come to Ireland to look at office blocks or 20th century suburban housing developments, but they do come to enjoy the Georgian core of Dublin, for example. And I think that we have to make sure that people in charge with economic policy understand the importance of that. The Icarus report, which was carried out by the Heritage Council with assistance from ourselves, should demonstrate that the built heritage directly support 25,000 full-time equivalent jobs. If we include indirect and induced effects, that goes up to 40,000 full-time equivalent jobs. And in terms of development of the national economy, Ireland's historic environment is estimated to account for 1.5 billion of the nation's gross added value. So I think that was a very important piece of work that we can use to show that investment in the built heritage is not a luxury, but is essential. I think it's incumbent on all of us in this sector to sell that message. Part of the discussion today will be on the specific issue of the protections in the planning legislation for protected structures. I have an interest in declaring that as a much more junior official back in the mid-90s. I was the representative of the Department of the Environment and Local Government at that time, or the Interdepartmental Committee set up under initiative of Michael D. Higgins, as Minister for Arts, Culture and Linguistics at the time, to look at the protections available to the architectural heritage. That resulted in a report in 1997, 98, I think, and then I subsequently worked on the legislation which brought in the protections in the enhanced protections in the planning code for what we call now protected structures, and that then became subsumed into the 2000 Act. So John O'Connor, former chairman of the board, was my assistant secretary at the time, so we both have some part to play in that legacy. So I'm very protective of that. I think the legislation that generally has stood the test of time. I think it's a good, robust piece of work. Nothing is perfect; it can't be improved upon, and certainly nothing can't be improved upon having after a period of reflection. So it was 13 years on since the enactment of the legislation, 10 years on since the Georgian Society had its conference to review the impact of the legislation at that time. So it is a very good time to consider what's working and what could work a little bit better. As I say, I think that the legislative model itself is pretty robust, and it may be that there's things we can do to improve its operation. So the department has been involved in a particular review of Part 4, and that will be coming to conclusion very shortly. We have the benefit of a significant accumulation of conservation knowledge by policymakers, professionals, educators and craftspeople working in the field. And professional conservation accreditation systems are now in place. So, in having regard to that, the department's goal in conducting the review is to critically examine the operation of the existing legislation and to recommend amendments and to augment guidance on the operation of the Act. Propose specific ways that central and local government policy, practice and guidance can effectively protect the historic building stock and make built heritage central sustainable area regeneration. devise effective financial instruments for built heritage protection based on sound economic arguments to encourage the latent demand that is there for conservation of historic structures, and identify public sector training requirements and foster the development of the education and training mechanisms necessary to serve sustainable, high quality built heritage management. So with that note, I'd just like to thank the members of the Expert Advisory Committee who've assisted with the department, and some of them are here today, either as speakers or in the audience, for their hard work on this piece of this important review over the past few months. And as I'm hoping that this will go to the Minister shortly, and that we will come to a conclusion on it. Just before I conclude, the economic situation is posing a challenge to us all, and it's certainly posing a challenge to how we work. We have lost significant resources in the department for us to help the built heritage. So we have to look at other ways of trying to channel support, assistance and finance to the built heritage. The government has, for example, targeted tourism investment as an area of support, and there are significant funds in that area that we are now beginning to draw on ourselves. For example, I've got responsibility for national parks in addition to the built heritage, and we're funding the redevelopment of Killarney House in Killarney, largely through a Fall to Ireland grant. So the government department ourselves are looking to sources like that, and I think we have a job to do to ensure that those sources of funding are channeled to meet our needs. In the past, we were suspicious of the operation of some of the more community-orientated funding mechanisms, such as LEADER, because we had experience whereby maybe local, very well-intentioned groups went out to carry out conservation projects, but without proper advice, guidance, assistance, and maybe did more damage than good. And the approach taken was to say, well, actually, we shouldn't be encouraging the funding of those groups to do that kind of work. That's completely switched around. Now we need to say, actually, there are sources of funding out there. Rather than saying, don't direct them to the built heritage, the answer is to say, absolutely, we must direct this funding to the built heritage, but we must do it in a proper way. So we put a lot of work from the department on the architectural heritage side, which Mark Coigligh is in charge of, our built monuments side of the department. Work very closely with the Department of Environment, Community and Local Government to draw up guidelines and protocols to see how we can draw this funding, how we can use the funding that is there for a mutual benefit. And I think that's been very successful. And we're also looking at, again, in terms of things that don't cost money, but which can assist, which is to help local authorities, help owners, help developers to reuse their protected structures by saying it can be done, and we're working on best practice manuals to show how that can be done. That's an area of particular tension between conservation, reuse, redevelopment. But we all know that the worst outcome is non-use and dereliction. So we have to get that balance right. And we have to assist everybody to make sure we get the balance right. It's never going to be perfect. There'll always be debate, controversy, but that's good. And on a more mundane level, we're also looking at the resources the department has, for example, in relation to the National Ministry of Architecture and Heritage, a fantastic resource. But how can we use that better? How can we add to economic development by showing it as a tourist resource, saying you can come to our country, here's a great, if you're interested in the built heritage, or the finest aspects of the built heritage, we can help, because we got all that information here. So we're carrying out initiatives in relation to the Buildings of Ireland.ie website, the archaeology.ie website, to try and bring tourists, or help tourists find our most significant built heritage sites. So I think that's hopefully a positive note to conclude on, that in the doom and gloom of the depths of an economic recession where we are very poorly resourced economically, there are things we can do, there are things that we are doing to try and assist. And at a conference today, we're all ears for more ideas. We won't be able to deliver them all, but we will be able to pick up some of the things that we can deliver on, or things that we can plan for future years when the tide turns again. So thank you very much.